Hi there and welcome to Lorena's Labyrinth. I'm Anah Parreli, if you're not aware. If you're a returning visitor, of course you will be, and thank you for your ongoing support. If you're a new visitor, this is a continuation of the Emotional Intelligence series and about raising our personal awareness of ourselves and learning how to manage our emotional responses and basically being, taking on board our experiences, harnessing our emotions and creating the types of outcomes that we're seeking to create for ourselves in positive ways. Now, I want to point out that this is a re-recording. I created this video and I tried to do it from an objective scenario or viewpoint using a hypothetical example. And what I found was that it was actually quite difficult to make the video relatable to you from a hypothetical perspective. So what I've actually done is I'm going to use a very old situation, relationship incident between myself and my brother that occurred quite a few years ago, and I'll draw upon that experience to demonstrate how this reflective framework works and how you can implement it within your personal relationships. Now, obviously, I learned about the framework, Gibbs Reflective tool, when I was doing my Bachelor of Social Work, and you'll usually find it used in professional settings. So you will be able to adapt this tool to your work situations or to your family or friendship relationships or just relationships in general. I must admit that when I was at university, I actually found this process of doing the tool. We used to have to journal and then present it to lecturers to demonstrate that we'd taken on board learning and that we were being able to be critical at ourselves, our own responses and that kind of thing. But I found it to be very uncomfortable because we do talk about our feelings in there and our innermost workings. And while the lecturers obviously would say we're not there to assess what you feel and what you think within your journaling, they're still conducting and grading you upon the process and whether or not you do it correctly. But I sort of felt that, it does give you, if we look at the friendship circles video, which I've put up, it's kind of like letting somebody who's in a circle 4 or 5 step into your circle 1 actually against your will. So this is probably why I found it a bit uncomfortable at university. But from a personal perspective, I actually find the tool to be really, really good, very helpful for unpacking emotions. And of course, this is why I think it's a good idea to tie it in with the other videos that I've loaded. And I would also recommend, if you haven't watched those videos, that you at least watch the video on naming your emotions, which talks about primary, secondary and tertiary emotions, because I would use this tool now in conjunction with the content on that video. Before you get started though, you will need to have a journal, some means of recording what you're thinking and feeling and all of this kind of stuff with the process. And this is because, sometimes it can take more than a couple of minutes to process. If you've written stuff down and you've captured it, you can walk away and come back and complete this process as you go through, because sometimes the more traumatic events take a little bit longer to unpack. Now, for myself, I don't use a book anymore. My preference is actually to use a office document, and I have a template that I use, and the template that I use is not exactly the same as the ones that I'm providing here today, but basically I put all the questions onto this document. I have the questions up there and how I should be responding them, what type of questions I need to ask myself within each stage of the evaluation reflection, and that gives me the prompts that I need to unpack whatever has occurred. So it's a very helpful tool for that. Now, the beauty also of doing an office document is once you've actually completed it, you have the option to destroy it. Sometimes you might want to hold onto that journal and keep it as an ongoing thing so that you can go back and check your own progress. Excuse me, coughing. To check your progress and your own growth, just for your own validation and recognition that, you are developing and evolving as well. So you might want to hold on to it, but at least you've got some options there. So yes, preparation, prepare to record your answers with this cycle. So we start by doing a description. We describe the incident that occurred, and we try to be completely emotionally impartial through this process. What we're doing is we're answering questions like we were a witness to our own incident or event, if you like. So what happened? When and where did it happen? Why did it happen? What did you do? How did you react? And were other people involved? And what did they do? And what was the outcome? So within the context of the scenario that happened to me some years ago is I was very distressed. Something had happened. So I chose to call my brother for support over the phone. I'm not actually sure where he was. And in fact, we'll explore that later. But why did it happen? What happened? I called my brother and I started to tell him something that had happened to me through a third party, and I was distressed. And during the call, he actually cut me off within about the first 30 to 60 seconds. And he said to me, "Can you hear yourself?" Okay. My reaction to that was fairly negative, but it was internalized. He then responded and clarified, and it ended up having a positive outcome. Okay, so that's removing the feeling and all the fluff of the incident. I'm just saying this is what happened. So that's how we would do the first part of a description. So once we've identified the situation, as in the previous slide, we then go into the next phase of the cycle, which is to explore our feelings. And this is where we describe our thoughts as well as our feelings in greater detail, basically to reflect, to give us an opportunity to think about how our feelings corresponded or related to the incident. And we can ask ourselves a few questions here. So what I've done is I ended up, bear with me please, I'm so sorry, I ended up figuring the only way that I could actually do justice to this topic was actually to create a reflective journal myself, okay, in regard to this incident for your benefit. So we highlight the experience by asking ourselves a few questions, which you can see up here, which is, what did you feel? And I can honestly say I felt a range of emotions during the time that question was asked. I found myself on a very fast track of roller coastering emotions while I basically held my breath. My primary emotion that I could establish, actually I'll stick with, I was horrified, okay? And I was even mortified when he cut me off. I then recognized that I felt dismayed. I was disappointed in him for letting me down as I perceived him to have done. I was also disappointed in myself, even frustrated at myself for thinking or expecting that he would be able to support me at this time. Now, I just want to clarify here the emotions. This is where that emotional tool of naming it comes in, because I have said on the previous video, I am a bottom-up processor. So when it comes to recognizing my emotions, I can actually name them quite well at this level, you know, the dismay and the disappointment and all the rest of it. But linking it back to the primary and tertiary emotions is something that, without the assistance of the tool, that I would probably struggle to do. So I can tell based on my tertiary emotions that my primary emotions here were initially of fear. That was the shock and the horror and being mortified. Fear, I guess, of abandonment, fear of being left alone and having to battle on through the difficulty that I was actually calling him about anyway. And then the other emotions that I felt were actually sadness, because there was those feelings of, I think I'm isolated, I've just been rejected, I've been neglected and uncared about, and now I feel defeated. So there's a compounding of sad emotions then. And then once I went through that process of the sad stuff, then I started to go into this escalated form of feeling enraged and angry, okay? So I've unpacked my emotions there. And then it says, why did you feel this way? Okay, and in this scenario, you highlight the major reasons behind feeling the way that you were feeling at the time. Well, I've kind of already tapped on that, where I say I felt uncared about, I felt excluded and unsupported, I felt very let down, that I was alone and unsupported through my problems. I was at the time addressing problems on multiple multiple fronts. I had some work-related issues, I had some legal issues going on, and I also had some family carer obligations. So my coping abilities were absolutely stretched to my absolute limits, and I was really struggling to manage all of these pressures and to even maintain hope and faith during that time. And there were very few people around me within my social network or family circles who were able to give me the support and advice that I needed at the time, hence me feeling unsupported and recognising, actually, no, I'm jumping ahead in the process, so I won't say and recognising, okay. So then the next thing in regard to feelings is the question of how did other external factors influence your feelings? Well, this is the section where we underline the positive or negative influences of the external factors, such as the environment. And I've just said that my mood was influenced because of all these compounding factors. I was interacting with lawyers. Now, I actually can't remember the incident which occurred that led me to call him anyway, because I just remember what happened from the actual phone call. And then we ask our questions, how did the other internal factors influence your feelings? Well, the reality is, by the time I called him, I was already in a heightened emotional state, and I was feeling very vulnerable and fearful. Obviously, when you're dealing with legal matters, even though I was the person that I was seeking justice. It wasn't against me. I was hopeful that I would have a positive outcome and that justice would prevail. So I was already angry before I called him. So then we come to the evaluation stage, after we've expressed our feelings and our thoughts at the time of the incident. We look at what worked well and what didn't work well. And this includes the evaluation of experiences from both the good and the bad points. And it allows a process of rationalising the actual experience. So these are some of the questions. What worked well? All right, so if I was to answer this, what worked well was that I actually controlled my anger and I didn't react to him in an outburst. When our feelings are hurt, it's very easy to turn around and burst into tears or to lash out, which, was certainly something that flew through my mind, if I recall correctly. Like, what are you talking about? How dare you speak to me this way? You've hurt my feelings. I feel abandoned, all of that stuff. I didn't say any of that. Now, that may have been a conscious self-control of my emotions, or it could even be the fact that actually I think my mouth was dropped open. I was pretty shocked by his response. But either way, I was able to retain my silence and I was able to control my external verbal expression and communication. So that was a big bonus because I didn't exacerbate and create further problems for us as far as our communication goes. What didn't work well, the question there was, while I was able to manage my external composure, if you like, internally, I was an absolute basket case. My mind was racing. My emotional regulation was just, going from, say, 6 through to 10. I was going through the roof, and I was struggling to maintain that internal composure and not actually burst into tears. And in fact, it was so difficult to maintain that internal composure, if you like, that by the end of the conversation, I was absolutely exhausted and fatigued because I was drained, okay? Now, then the next thing is, what did we contribute, or what did I contribute? So what I did was, actually, after going silent, I contributed what is called listening, and listening very carefully, not just to the words. I was listening to the tone and the way he was using his words, and I recognised that he is human and he doesn't always express himself in a way that he means to. This is very typical, and particularly typical of men in my experience, where they will just blurt. And, I'm guilty of that as well. And when you actually unpack that with them, you find out that's not actually what they intended for you to hear. So I listened very clearly and very closely, and at the appropriate time, I asked questions to get him to clarify what it was he meant. Now, what did he contribute? Well, actually, he's more sensitive than I give him credit for, because during the pause, he actually reiterated the question, "Can you hear yourself?" Which, of course, I took further affront to. And then when I started to respond, he cut me off again, and he said to me, "I can see that you have misunderstood what I was saying," which is great sensitivity on his part. He said, "I'm not talking about what you're saying to me." He said, "I want you to listen to how you're speaking to me." Now, immediately, if somebody's escalated such as I was at the time, it's like, I misread that, or I misinterpret that as being, are you saying I'm treating you badly or whatever? That was not what he was saying to me. Okay. So what was missing in there? The missing part or the element to all of these escalations was I misunderstood his intention and what it was that he was trying to say to me. And what he was trying to say to me was he knew that I was distressed without me even going into the content. It was triggering him. He was panicking because he could hear the distress in my voice because he's not used to hearing or seeing me that way. So that's the first thing. The other thing was that he wanted me to listen to my voice because I was speaking rapid pace, very fast, which was very out of character for me. And he wanted me to be able to see that my health was being impacted by everything that was going around. So his intentions were good. So I was missing his intention. It would have been good if I'd been a mind reader at the time, because had I been reading his mind, I would have understood when he was saying, "Can you hear yourself?" He was saying, "Hey, slow down, take a breath," right? Calm the farm was actually what he was trying to say to me. So in the next slide, we get to analyse the experience, and we'll go on to that now. So when we analyse the situation, we make sense of all of it within its entirety, and we establish the meanings of the situation and reasons for success or failure. So some of the questions we would ask during the analysis phase of the framework is, why didn't things work well? What went wrong there, basically? And realistically, the bottom line is what went wrong was I was actually caught in the moment. I was stuck in the brainstem. I recommend you watch the neuroscience and the physiology of distress. I was stuck in the brainstem. I was not thinking rationally or logically at the time that I called him, which obviously is not a good space to be making a phone call. I hadn't taken the time to regulate myself or to do any breathing before I phoned him. Now, if we're honest with ourselves here, and I have to be, I was actually being very selfish. I was not giving any consideration to him when I made this call. I wasn't taking into account that he may have been in the middle of something, that he has responsibilities, and that timing is actually important. And to this day, actually, I don't know if I've ever asked him if I called him at a bad time. But whether I did or didn't, I'm going to say, when we get into the conclusion, this actually had a positive outcome, okay? So you may as well say I was actually quite self-absorbed and selfish through that situation. And because I was so focused on myself and my own emotional uproar, if you like, what I did was I actually transferred my agitation and distress to him, because immediately he heard my voice. He was able to recognize I was distressed, which that escalated his concerns for me. So, that was not a nice thing to do, albeit it wasn't deliberate. What else can I add here? Look, he did step up to the plate, I might add, but let's be real. When you call a family person who's not qualified to address these kind of issues, you're never going to get the responses that you actually need, or rarely, okay? At the end of the day, my brother is not trained in mental health or supporting people in these kind of situations. He is a tradesman, and his normal job function is not one that requires him to be a great deal of sensitivity. And I wouldn't go as far as sensitivity is alien to his nature. I would just say, look, it's not his middle name. He does try, and as he's matured and got older, because he's not a young man anymore, he certainly is a lot more sensitive. Now, which is why, when we answer the question of why did things go well, basically it was because there was a willingness to communicate and maintain our relationship in a healthy way. And also because there was a willingness from both parties not to judge each other without giving them an opportunity to speak about what it was, that were the emotional issues that were the problem. So I guess I could say that because we were older and we'd lived a bit of life, we were more interested in having open communication and problem resolution. So I cut back on my anger and any sharp words I might have used in the past when I was a young person. I did ask probing questions of him to get him to expand about on what it was he was trying to say to me. And I did listen to him when he actually pointed it out to me that my speech had been compromised and it was indicating that my levels of stress were going through the roof and I needed to be taking some actions to make sure that I stayed well throughout this high stress, high pressure period of my life. And if we were going to bring this back to tertiary emotions, and feelings, we could say, why did things go well? Because there was regard and care for each other within that moment. And, as siblings, obviously we can bring that back to it went well because there was actually love. So, what meaning can we derive from this situation is about you get a clear picture of the situation and everything is understood meticulously. So, the meaning that I was able to gain from this situation was a heightened sense of self-awareness as a consequence of this honest and open communication. Prior to our conversation, I wasn't aware that if I became highly stressed, but I don't think, to be honest, I've ever been as stressed as I was in that particular situation, was that my communication be compromised. And it showed me very clearly that if I don't take time out to monitor my own emotional balance and stress levels, then I can inadvertently, despite best intentions, trigger other people and put them in a position of alarm as well. And the other thing was, I learned throughout that conversation that he was very supportive of me. He was very caring towards me, and he was very, very concerned about my own health at that time. And I'll talk about what I learned by looking at the conclusion. So, just a reminder within this example and scenario that I'm giving you, along with the tool, I'm just showing you methods for you to develop for yourself. And I'm also really trying to be brief as far as the content that I'm delivering here, particularly because it applies to my personal situation. That's got definitely something to do with it. But anyway, by the time we get to the conclusion, we do this after we've done the analysis because we can reflect on all of our learnings, and highlight any changes that we need to make in the way that we behave and act, and potentially for future situations as well. If incidents such as these arise again in the future, there's going to be a clear plan that we'll work on how to address it to maintain emotional balance throughout any challenges. So within this situation, it's a case of, what did you learn? Well, what did I learn? I recognized that when I was unwell, you may as well say, that I had failed to consider other people's needs. That people need to have time to prepare. You can't just phone people up. Well, I don't feel that you can. I don't think it's fair. So this is what I learned. I don't think it's fair to expect other people to suddenly be able to drop everything that they're doing and be there to accommodate our emotional needs. I think perhaps a little bit of notification might work. Perhaps I could have sent him an SMS in advance saying, is this a good time? The other thing I learned is basically abrupt communication is not always a reflection of whether or not a person is flawed or unflawed, but it's rather a reference to the types and forms of communication. And I learned that before I take offence, I really should ask more questions to ensure that I am hearing what the other person is trying to say to me. This is before I start emotionally reactive. and to try and see the other person's perspective before I make any conclusions about their motivations or the intentions or what it is they're trying to do. The other thing is not to take anything personally, because I had reacted to what I considered to be a personal affront or an insult to me, where it wasn't that at all. What he was actually extending was care, although his communication was, when you turn around and say to somebody, can you hear yourself? Now, in fairness to him, to put this into perspective, he may have been down the shop at the time. I recall that he was actually busy at the time, because it sounded like he was walking or whatever. So I have called it an inopportune time, okay? What I did learn from this as well was greater insight into myself and how I respond to multiple stresses. And I was able to recognize my own limitations. Just how much can a koala bear, is an Australian saying, before it drops, before the koala bear becomes a drop bear. There's only so much people can take. And within that, this is when we have to be really mindful about our boundaries. We've got to review our relationships, establish which ones are healthy, which ones aren't. It doesn't mean that we have to cut people off necessarily, but we might have to push some relationships to the outer. I refer back to the Circles of Friendship video. If you haven't watched it yet, I do recommend it. If you've got some relationships that are fractious, shall we say, they might, because you've got heightened vulnerability at the time, certainly I did, there are some relationships that might need to be put into the outer circles, which might be 4 or 5, until you've recouped and not quite so vulnerable, and then you can allow them a bit closer to you. So I also learned that I needed to, as part of self-care, manage my time, and set aside and do some scheduling. Some things I could be flexible with, some things I couldn't. With the family care role, I had to be flexible and adaptable, and I needed within my own time management to schedule some time for self-care, right, which obviously I hadn't been doing. So I needed to be flexible and able to take advantage of moments in time for my own self-care. I had a responsibility to care for the person I was caring for. I had a responsibility, as far as lawyers and all the rest of it go, to respond in timely ways and to address things. But I needed to put parameters around that availability so that I could put it down and let it go and move on from it. So then that leads to the question, well, if these are the things that I conclude as what did I learn from there, I've got some unmet needs there, I think would be the case. So actually therapy would be a good one. Find a counsellor to go and do your blurting to when you're getting stressed, rather than your poor old brother. What skills do I need to handle the situations more effectively? Would have been good to actually have spent some time reviewing stress management, revisiting, because I know a lot of these skills through my training, okay? But we do tend to forget them in a crisis. Review them, breath for distress, and how to manage time, how to prioritise, perhaps conflict de-escalation, or any of these type of things. You can put this in there your own way. What else could I have done to deal with this situation differently is a good question to ask myself in hindsight. I believe, in hindsight, the best thing that I could have done before phoning my brother was actually to have regulated, to reach at least a balanced central point, to calm my farm, as he was trying to say to me, and to bring myself to a rational stage, and being a little bit more considerate. Send him an SMS saying, can you please call me at the first convenient time, rather than me expecting him to be available at my convenience. I just want to mention because this happened a long time ago now, while myself and my brother, we never actually discussed a plan like this, what has come out of it is that I do send him an SMS now, and not just when I'm distressed. I will send him an SMS before I call him, because I'm aware that he's got family commitments and work responsibilities and that kind of stuff. So if I want to have a chat with him now, I just send him an SMS saying, give us a call when you're free. And just in case, if there's been some stress happening for me, I'll put on there, not urgent, take your time. Just things like that are a little bit more respectful and considerate to him. What else? Hmm. Okay, so I think that's here for as far as the conclusion could go. I think also I'll discuss this in the action plan because that comes next. So when it comes to the action plan, I've got to be honest and say prevention is better than a cure. And when I reflect on this incident in hindsight, I actually don't blame my brother. I don't think that he did anything wrong. I'm not even convinced that I did anything specifically wrong. Okay. What I could have done is taken a better approach. So I think that the emotional distress that I experienced at that time was down to my failing to do self care. Okay, yeah, okay, there was extenuating factors within the equation. So it's a case of what might I do to deal with this situation in future. Well, I think the best thing to do was make sure that it doesn't happen in the future. I forgot to mention there that actually one of the positives with this is I recognise and realise that my relationship with my brother is a very healthy relationship, and it's one that I want to nourish and hold on to, and where I value him, and that as a human being, if we have somebody that we value and care about and appreciate, then we actually should be letting that person know so that they recognize that they are valued and appreciated. It always goes a long way. So anyway, back to the action plan. What might I do in the future? It would be to really pay attention to my own physiological responses, to recognize when my voice speeds up, especially if I'm under a lot of pressure, which, by the way, I can do now. Most of the time, I can recognize. Um, because sometimes we're so busy with life that we don't see that our behaviors are being influenced by our stress. It's only this is why meditation, for example, is recommended. It's when you have that quiet space and you pay attention to what your body is telling you, the physiology of distress, then you start feeling the butterflies or the leg cramps or whatever, um, leg tension, that kind of thing. And if we're so busy running around looking after everybody else and meeting everyone else's needs, we miss those signs. And so quite often I'll put my hand up, I'm guilty of that, especially because sometimes life offers me a lot of stresses. But anyway, what will happen is once I get to a certain point, I can see it within my voice now, and I know that is a case of time to slow down, sweetheart. Go and have a soak in the tub. Do whatever it is that that will help to bring your stress levels down. If that means going and having a nana nap, then that's what I need to do. I need to be paying attention to my physiological and behaviors earlier rather than later. I need to ensure that when I'm managing my stress, so the action plan for me does include, and I've got it written here, um, focusing on the breathing exercises, making a concerted effort to not transfer my anxieties or distress onto other people, to be respectful and mindful of where they might be at in their lives. If I've had a curly situation thrown at me, that's the SMS. Then the other thing is, how will you develop your skills and abilities to deal with similar situations? Um, roundabout here, because we're talking about something that happened years ago, it's like, yeah, okay, well, I don't actually have a copy of that journal page anymore. So I've just put, well, create more time for self-care activities such as mindfulness and meditation as managing my stress, and review my strategies around time management and if I can speak, prioritization and creating healthy boundaries within relationships, review my circles of friendship and identify which relationships need to have firmer boundaries and which don't. Right. So I think I've given you enough tips to run through and try and practice yourself. So for now, my friends, I'm going to love you, leave you, and I'll start preparing for the next videos. I will put up links to the references or to the other videos I referred to, like the friendship circles, physiology of distress, and the emotional intelligence videos as I strain my brain. Um, so that you know what I'm talking to and talking about, and you can easily access them. I find definitely it's easier to look at the tertiary emotions when we're unpacking. simply because I can name them and I understand them. Now, when you look at the emotional videos or the emotional naming video, I've got the video chapters. So you can just click on those. If you don't want to watch the whole video, just click on the chapters and then have a look and see how you can apply that. Because I've done a page, say, for anger that shows the secondary and the tertiary emotions. I've got it for sadness, love, and all the rest of it. And I should point out that with the reflective journal, it doesn't always have to be about an unpleasant incident or something that was unhappy. Sometimes it can just be about, reviewing your friendship circles. Which of my relationships are healthy? You can adapt this reflective cycle to anything that you would like to explore further, because the whole thing is that it's about getting to know yourself as well, know your strengths, know your vulnerabilities, um, identifying areas for self growth and personal or professional development, all of these things. Now, before I go, though, besides saying thank you very much for being part of my journey, I just want to mention, if you like the content here on the channel, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave a comment, because I learned more recently this whole business of having a channel. I'm continually learning, and I've only just realized that apparently, if people comment on your videos, it helps out with the algorithm. So if you would like to leave a comment, that would be wonderful as well. And as I get more subscribers and people commenting and even asking questions, I'll try and include a response to that. I'll respond to you at the first opportunity anyway if I see you writing on the wall. But the other thing is too that if there's specific questions, then I'll try and adapt responses into the Sunday yarning video. So don't forget, I load a video every Sunday. Anyway, until the next video, take care, my friends. Have a beautiful week. See you on the next video. Bye-bye for now.